Hello, I'm Maria Aranzamendi. I'm a nurse. I work as researcher at the Institute for Cultural Society of the University of Navarra in Pamplona, Spain. This session is on behalf of the RESPACC Erasmus Plus project, which is about research for palliative care clinicians, and this session is about qualitative analysis. The general objective is to reflect on the definition and data analysis in qualitative research. The specific objectives of the session are to understand the common aspect of qualitative data analysis process and to understand that there are different types of data analysis. What is qualitative data analysis? The picture can be an example of it. It's about understanding what's in the inside and not only at the outside. Like you can see in the picture, there might be different things in the inside and the outside. So it's making meaning of everything, the inside and the outside. So data analysis is sorting and making sense, finding meaning of data for a purpose. And the purpose is to answer and address a research question. It involves reduction, abstraction, recontextualization. Data provide a doorway to something else, something bigger, an understanding of something else that we get to by coding and asking questions. There are some characteristics of qualitative analysis. It's a back and forth process, it's not something linear. It's mainly inductive. We start analyzing specific data and we understand processes and make an abstraction process to identify more general or global ideas. Data collection and analysis happen more simultaneously than in other research projects. Because during the data collection we are already thinking and trying to make meaning or understanding of what we are hearing. It has a common aim, that is to reflect the complexity of the phenomenon under the study and to present the underlying structure that gives meaning to the complexity. You can see in the picture we have different vegetables, different fruits, but the inside out, the outside might be different, and we need to take into account both to make some interpretation of the meaning there. There are some commonalities of the qualitative process analysis, and the commonalities can be grouped in 4 steps: comprehending, synthesizing, theorizing, and recontextualizing. And we are going to explain briefly these steps. But first we have to consider that the analysis in qualitative research is an intellectual process and that it's very important to write memos, which we will explain later, and try these memos to reflect the process that the researcher has been conducting. So the first step on the process of analyzing is comprehending. It's about grasping with the mind the nature, the significance, the meaning of something. It's easiest when you have done some data collection and some transcription yourself, because you are already comprehending part of the data that you are reading or managing. It requires reading with purpose, and it needs developing and recording your own ideas and discoveries in the forms of memos. Comprehending is striving to make sense of the data, finding out what's going on, and the researcher needs to be able to describe the phenomenon comprehensively in this step. Reading and rereading, and this gives the idea of sometimes data saturation, which might be when we start feeling that the new data is not adding new ideas that are relevant to our research question. The second step on the process of data analysis is synthesizing, which is shifting important from unimportant things. and it's merging data to make a composite pattern, something that accurately captures a commonality across stories. It includes range and variation. We can have different experiences, different patterns that capture part of the experiences. And within the synthesizing process, we need to feel confident on the description of how people behave. It's a way of shifting the data and assembling the different pieces, thinking what's typical of the phenomenon and achieving the first general statements about the phenomenon. In this process, like in the picture, we are separating what is important from the unimportant to get a synthesis of the key statements. The third step is about theorizing. It's about making sense of the data, making meaning that best fits the data, linking diverse and seemingly unrelated facts. Like in the picture, we may have different pieces of a puzzle, and we need to fit them in a way that makes sense of the different areas of the puzzle. So in the theorizing, we are trying to identify which are the key aspects and make meaning. And in this phase, theory is a way of revealing the obvious, the implicit, the unrecognized, the unknown. Like in the picture, that cat was there from the beginning, but we couldn't see it because we had the different pieces of the puzzle unconnected. So when we connect the different bits, we start making some meaning, starting what was more obvious, but it was implicit. So the theorizing involves systematic classification of data. The researcher formulates different explanations of the phenomenon and maintains them until it's determined whether they fit the data or not. The theorizing process continues until the best and most concise explanation is obtained. Here there is a warning. There is a risk to take your own theorizing as fact and to get wed to one of theory too early. So the data has to really fit and find its way on the whole theory. There is not imposition of any underlying ideas that we may have. The fourth step is recontextualizing. It's putting the analysis theory back into the context so that it can be useful in other settings. It's linking it with the work of other researchers and establishing an established theory plays an important role, because we are seeing if there are links between the new knowledge and the established knowledge to add further knowledge. So it's to develop the theory further. It's exploring its application to other groups of settings. Like in the picture, we need to recontextualize. We can see the flowers, we can see the butterfly, but we need to recontextualize within the whole setting context to really capture what's there, which is the figure of a woman. So that's part of the recontextualizing. It's part of this process of the data analysis. We have talked about the main steps on the qualitative analysis, but we also have to consider the terminology. One of the terms to consider is unit of analysis. Which is our unit of analysis? Is a hospital, or is an individual, or is a case, a couple, a patient and a health professional, or a patient and a family member? Which is our unit of analysis? Then the other term is meaning unit, which is a set of related words or phrases with the same meaning. Then we have code, which is the label or the denomination of a meaning unit. There are also categories, which is a group of content that shares commonalities. It's like a thread that binds together different codes. And then it's also the theme, which is an expression of the latent content on the data. So all these terms are used in the coding process, which is the analyzing process. So coding is getting from unstructured and messy data to organize ideas about what's going on in the data. It's a central process in data analysis that involves sorting the piles of data by identifying persistent words, phrases, concepts, ideas. And it's a clinical process and generating new ideas. So you need to check the new ideas with past data. So it's an inductive process, but also has some deductive process because you are going back and seeing if it fits with previous data. And any qualitative researcher codes because that's the way we analyze. So like in the pictures, we can have raw data, which is the strawberry, but how we process it makes getting different results. We can have jam or we can have jelly. The raw material, the raw data is the same, but the process influence on the results, and that needs to take into account when deciding what type of analysis we are going to use. We have said that coding is the analyzing process, and that involves sorting the piles of data by identifying persistent ideas, and it's labeling and uncovering underlying meaning. We join similar things to make groupings, and then we create categories. And we are all the time looking for links. It's a linking process. And how you code and how you link depends on the method you use. When codes are stable, you can organize them into a coding framework that helps the coding process. But as you can see here, you can have different type of results. Jelly, jam, is different. Within the coding process, there is also analytic coding, which helps you develop themes or categories. It helps to group further the codes initially created. And the initial codes are closer to the data and are the most basic way of analyzing. Coding happens through asking questions of the data, making concepts and theorizing about them. It's the process of ideas moving to a new level that groups and it's more abstract. So during the analytic coding, you separate the data into piles or groupings and you determine what belong and what didn't belong and where they belong, the different parts. So it finds patterns that are predictable and it helps labeling your groupings. Here in the picture you can see you have jam, you have jelly, you have mermaid, or you have fruit butter. So you can get different results depending on the process. In the process of analysis, memos are key. They are also used during data collection because they serve to guide and be transparent on the research process. Memos is the process of writing notes or memos about thoughts related to the analysis of the data. It serves to assist in making conceptual leaps from raw data to those abstractions that explain the research phenomena in the context in which it's examined. Memos create an interface between the participants' data, the researcher's interpretation, and the wider theory, so are very useful. And it's important to write it down instead of having different notes on your head to trying to follow the analysis process. Memos is recording your thoughts, reflection on the process, keeping yourself writing and thinking about the bigger picture. In the memos, you note things that are especially interesting or challenging or significant in the data. You also record there are sections that are ambiguous and could be interpreted in different ways. So you take notes in your memos and you continue analyzing further sources of data to try to see what's the best meaning making that fits with all the data. Memos explain why one researcher interpreted or coded sources in a certain way, so that another researcher or a reader can have a description of what meant to you a specific category and how you describe it and explain it. So explaining your coding is a way of explaining your analytical choices and adds transparency and enhance rigor. Register how the data either supports or challenges a theory, because that helps you to question in a positive way and push further on the data analysis, so you don't only keep on the descriptive analysis. There are some tips for data analysis that need to be considered. The first one is to prepare the data. Make a copy that is safe, so that in case something happens, you have always that as a resource. Identify the data so that you know that each section that you might take as a code, you know where it comes from. You can get back to the whole context in case you need it. So preparing the data might entail transcribing interviews or writing the file notes and specifying the timing of the file notes, if it was morning, for example, if it's about shift, morning shift, afternoon shift, because these peculiarities might influence on the type of data that you get. It's key to conduct a systematic management of the data, to have a good analysis process. The analysis process gives direction to the data collection. Sometimes when you are analyzing, you identify that, for example, gender might influence on the caregiver's perspective. So you might be interested in interviewing caregivers of a different gender to try to understand better your topic of interest, which might be about caregivers and the experience of caregiving. Another tip for data analysis is that data can lead also your inquiry. It might make you question or adjust questioning, because you might need to go deeper in a specific aspect that become relevant during the data analysis. So the data analysis often begins when you are exploring what's here. What is this telling me? So all what we know about an aspect of experience of study is organized together within the data analysis, so it helps to later make a closer examination of specific sections that are about the same aspect and go further in the analysis. You need to be cautious when you are labeling, to keep the initial labels as close to the data as possible, so that you are not overinterpreting and you are keeping the codes in a way that they capture what people share with you. Software is very useful when doing data analysis, but because it helps data management, the different softwares that are available for qualitative analysis, they don't do the analysis. They help to manage the data, but the interpretative process and the coding and choosing which is the most adequate name for the label is part of the research role, and the software doesn't do that. There are some types of analysis. In fact, there are several, but here we are going to briefly mention 3 common types. First is content analysis. The second that we are going to talk about is constant comparative analysis, and then framework analysis. Content analysis is a set of documents and emphasize the meaning of the text. Data content analysis classifies what is common or recurring, and it's analyzing descriptive and narrative data content in order to identify major themes or patterns in the data. Data are reviewed and codes are created, and you create code scheme, categories, and then themes. There are 2 main types of content analysis: the manifest content that describes the visible and obvious components, and the latent content, which entails an interpretation of the underlying meaning. Another type of analysis is framework analysis. It's a method of content analysis that involves summarizing and classifying data within a thematic framework. It's a matrix-based method for sorting and synthesizing data, and you have a picture of how it might look like. You have themes, sub-themes, and you have different participants. So it's easy to see in the framework, in the matrix, which is the framework that is part of the analysis. The framework analysis has different steps. The first one is familiarization of data management, and it includes a thematic analysis to develop a coding scheme. Then this coding scheme is applied through the indexing. You are applying the codes in a systematic way to the data and adjusting something if needed. And then is charting, reorganizing the data according to the thematic content. The second step is about descriptive accounts. It's drawing out the content and the nature of the theme. What does it include? What happens here? It helps to establish typologies, more complex and more refined descriptions of the data. And then the third step is the explanatory account. It's searching for relationship between codes. Type of analysis that we are going to mention is the constant comparative analysis. It's directed towards developing a new theory, explaining the process that is derived from and grounded in research data. So it's an analysis that is grounded in the data, and based on that you develop a theory. There are different steps. Open coding, which is about identifying and labeling meaningful units of test. The axial coding, which involves examination of each category to discover links, relationships, redundancy, and new patterns. And then the selective coding, which requires the reformulation of some of the categories as greater insight is achieved, and there is a conceptual abstraction. Then this whole process, you identify a core theme, which will be the theme that links all the other parts of the data. In the picture of the tree, we could say that the open coding will be identifying all the flowers. Then it will be axial coding when you start seeing links and relationships, and you might be creating like branches within the whole data and grouping. And at the end, you achieve the core theme that shows the main part of the tree, how it links with the branches and the flowers and the leaves. So it's identifying in the constant comparative analysis how all this is linked and explaining a theory that shows an explanation of this complexity. So in conclusion, we can say that there are some commonalities in the process of doing qualitative data analysis. And these commonalities are part of the intellectual process. But you also have to consider that there are different types of data analysis, and that you have to make decisions about which is the best approach to data analysis, which is the one that you choose, and that has to be coherent with your methodology and with your research question. Different type of analysis give different weight to the different steps of the process of analyzing, and they achieve different levels of interpretation and depth. So it has to be a coherence between the analysis, the data collection, the research, the methodology, the research questions, so that you achieve a good qualitative research study. Here, I want to say just thank you, and I want to leave with you here some references that might be useful. Some of these references are general references about qualitative research in general. Some of the references are specific about a specific type of analysis. We have briefly mentioned some of the characteristics of the different types that are quite common, but if you want to do qualitative data analysis, reading a bit further about the different approaches to analysis might be useful and important. These references can be very relevant to learn more about qualitative data analysis. All this material is part of the RESPACC Erasmus Plus project, which is for conducting research on promoting the competencies on research for palliative care clinicians.